Hi again. Okay, we're on to chapter 9, Self-Doubt. Tony had had a hard night. She'd been working overtime to finish a project for a client when she'd been called out to assist the police on two difficult cases, a suicide attempt and another domestic abuse case. She'd spent the first part of the night consoling a grieving widow whose husband decided that drinking himself to death was cleaner than a gun. Then she'd spent 5 hours waiting in the emergency room of the hospital for the doctors to stitch up a woman's head where she'd been hit with a bottle by her irate husband. Answering question upon question by the detective on duty and trying to convince the badly injured woman to file charges. When she'd finally left the hospital, she had to run her project over to the client in downtown Minneapolis before she could call it a day and go home. She was so tired she couldn't even gather the strength to voice it out loud. It wasn't so much the physical fatigue as the mental, and it wasn't so much dealing with a grieving widow as it was dealing with women who put up with abusive men. Once again, she wondered if she was getting burnt out on being an advocate. The thought passed through her mind like it always did when she was too tired to care where her mind wandered. At 11 the next morning, she finally drove into her driveway, thankful it was Saturday so she could sleep the day away. Getting out of her car, she walked to the trunk to retrieve her briefcase, computer, and a bag of groceries she had purchased on the way home. When she reached the rear of her car, she saw Jody's teenage daughter, Audra, standing with her boyfriend, Travis, in front of the Warren house. Audra was standing facing Travis, leaning into him as he leaned against his faded red Ford that was parked at the curb, his hands on her shoulders. From a distance, they looked like two sweethearts staring into each other's eyes with their foreheads touching while he caressed her neck and rubbed her shoulders. Tony gave the young couple a quick glance as she leaned forward into her trunk. As she stood, her hands full, she looked over at them again. Hoping they would be willing to help her with her things and getting them into the house, she started to wave to get their attention when something in Audra's posture stopped her. Audra wasn't leaning toward Travis. She looked more like a turtle that was trying to tuck its neck into its shell. Tony stopped what she was doing and faced the couple full on. Tony didn't know if her senses were simply on overload or her exhaustion had her imagining things, but something seemed off. Going unnoticed, she faced Audra and Travis full on and watched them curious. It only took a minute for Tony to realize that this wasn't a couple in the throes of young love. This was something else, something she had already seen too much of for one day. She saw that Travis had a hard grip on Audra's shoulders. As he pulled her toward him, he pressed his forehead against hers, forcing her head back, like he was giving her a subtle headbutt. Even though she stood a yard away, Tony heard the sharp intake of Audra's breath when Travis moved his hands from her shoulders to around her neck. She watched as Travis jutted his jaw forward and whispered something in a harsh tone in Audra's ear. Taking a moment to compose herself, Audra started across her yard, determined to find out what was going on. Remembering her talk with Jody from a couple of weeks before, it looked to Tony that Jody may have been right. Travis was mistreating Audra. Knowing she had to be careful to not let the situation get out of hand, Tony swallowed her misgivings and started across the lawn. Past experience had taught her that confronting an abusive man head-on usually made the woman retreat into the typical mode of defending her man. Making excuses for him and taking the blame for the abuse was the norm. Then once everyone had left, the man would take it out on the woman, making things worse, which was exactly what had happened the night before with her latest victim. The husband and wife had argued over a cold piece of meatloaf. He had slapped her and commenced yelling at her loud enough to attract the neighbors. When the cops showed up and saw the red mark on the woman's face, they went to arrest the husband for assault. The woman did the typical song and dance of saying she had run into a cabinet door. There was not a lot of cops could do but leave. Once they had left, the husband was so incensed that the cops had been called, he threw a beer bottle at his wife's head, cutting her left temple. It took a full hour of verbal abuse and bleeding before the woman finally got angry enough to fight back. By the time a second call had come into the cops from the neighbors, the broken bottle on the floor and the bleeding wife on the couch, it was obvious what had happened, and the cops knew this time they could make an arrest. But they wanted the wife to file formal charges. When the man heard this, he got angry again and called his wife a lazy slut, blaming her for the cops having to be at their house in the first place. This had been when Tony arrived. The tension between the cops and the husband was only slightly less important to Tony than the woman with the bleeding head. Tony's attention to the wife seemed to be making the man angrier as he accused them of taking his wife's side because they hadn't seen what really happened, saying she attacked him first. Tony saw a look pass between the man and the wife, and, as if on cue, the wife started defending her husband. Tony knew at this point that she had to get the wife away from the husband without making it look like she was blaming him. She knew from past cases that when the couple was alone again, the beating would probably be worse the next time. Tony was able to back the cops off long enough to talk to the husband. She gently explained to him that his wife probably needed stitches and it would be best for him if she took his wife to the hospital. Tony knew that confronting the man in a hostile way and outright blaming him in front of the cops would only anger him more. Her first priority was the wife. Once she got her out of the house, the cops could do whatever they wanted with him while she tried to convince the wife to file charges. Tony had learned that to keep an abusive man from escalating out of control, it had to look like she wasn't taking sides. That is how she had planned to approach Travis and Audra, friendly and without accusation. Trying to keep her anger from showing, Tony knew she would have to carefully diffuse the situation without making Travis suspicious so he wouldn't blame Audra later on. She also had to make certain that Jody was right and not simply being an overprotective mother, although Tony doubted it. She had to make sure the situation today was not simply a lover's quarrel. Taking a deep breath, Tony made a beeline for the couple, walking a little faster than she had intended. Audra and Travis were so focused on their conversation they didn't see or hear Tony approaching. Travis was pushing his forehead hard against Audra's as he dug his fingers into her shoulders. In a low, firm tone, he said, "I told you to stay away from him, damn it." "What is it you don't understand about that?" "Travis, he's just a friend. I've been friends with Ryan since first grade. You know that." "Don't tell me what I know. And what have I said about keeping your voice down?" "I'm sorry, I forgot. But you're hurting me." "I don't give a good goddamn. You are so stupid, you know that? Guys can't be friends with girls. All he wants from you is to get in your pants." He squeezed her shoulders a little harder for emphasis, making her cringe. "Brad told me he saw the two of you in the cafeteria sitting alone. I think you are purposely trying to embarrass me in front of my friends." "I would never do that, Travis. Ryan and I were talking over our science project that's due next week. That's all." In a quick shift of tone, he said in a quiet, forceful way meant to intimidate, "Well, I don't know if I want to go to prom tonight with someone who doesn't respect my feelings." "Travis," she pleaded, "you don't mean that. My parents bought me a new dress and all of our friends will be there." "You have no one to blame but yourself." The disappointment in Audra's eyes made Travis smile with the obvious knowledge that he knew he was in control. The fear in her eyes had him smirking like he reveled in her distress. Miss Cavlow? Miss Cavlow?" Dougie J came bounding out the front door with a wide smile just before Tony reached Travis's car. Travis and Audra heard Dougie J running down the sidewalk and jumped apart like two people guilty of a crime. Tony stopped and turned toward Dougie J as he continued to run toward her. "Dougie J, hello there. What are you up to?" Tony took an instant to turn and eye Travis. With a startled expression, Audra stared at her neighbor. The look Tony had given Travis was full of malice and suspicion. Tony could see the worry on Audra's face and watched as she made an exaggerated display of enthusiasm at seeing her little brother, as if her ruse would distract Tony from the obvious. "Dougie, what are you doing here?" She bent down to look at Dougie J on his level and held her arms out to him. Ignoring his sister, Dougie J ran around to his neighbor. "Miss Cavlow, come and see what I got for my birthday." Tony thought it was cute how the little 6-year-old always mispronounced her name. "Oh my goodness, is it your birthday?" Tony tried to convey happiness at Dougie's news while still maintaining vigilance on Travis. "Oh, tomorrow, but I'm getting my present today." He grabbed her hand to drag her toward the house. "Oh, okay, she said. "Just a second there, though. I want to say hello to your sister." Turning toward the young couple, Tony addressed them. "Hi, Audra, Travis." Tony watched Travis retreat into the stereotypical act of the meek and innocent. She'd seen that play too many times not to recognize it. The "I don't know what's going on" look that the guilty always sought full authority. "Hello, Mrs. Cavallo. How are you?" His pretense of respect could not hide the guilt around his eyes. "Is everything all right?" Tony asked dubiously, inwardly thinking, "You don't fool me, kid." "Oh, yes," Audra said a little too quickly. "We were just talking about prom tonight, weren't we, Travis?" Looking directly at Travis to let him know she knew what he'd been doing, Tony said, "Yeah, I did hear something about prom being tonight." "Yes, ma'am, we were talking about who all is going to be there tonight," Travis said with bravado. Ignoring Travis, Tony asked, "Audra, what happened to your forehead, honey? You've got a big red mark on it." Oh, really?" Audra stammered, immediately proceeding to rub her forehead with the heel of her hand. "Oh, I don't know. How funny. I must have gotten too much sun." "Mrs. Cavallo," Dougie yanked on her hand impatiently, "come and see my present now." Shocked by how much strength her little 6-year-old neighbor had, she pulled back just a little to give one last warning remark, looking directly at Travis. "Well, you kids have fun tonight and be nice to each other. Now I guess I'd better go see Dougie's present before he pulls my arm off." "Yeah, thanks, Miss Cavallo." Turning toward his car, he said over his shoulder to Audra. "I'd better go," said Travis. "See you later, Audra." With a pleading look at Travis, Audra said in a pathetic tone, "Really? You mean it?" As if she knew she had given something away. She added quickly, "I mean, yeah, of course. I'll be ready at 7. Yeah, Travis offhandedly threw the words at her as he got in his car and sped away. "Now, Miss Cavallo, come on," pleaded Dougie J. With the aid of a small boy, the tense situation was diffused as he pulled Tony toward the house, followed by Audra. Turning back to look at Audra, Tony saw a look of relief cross her face, as if she was grateful for the interruption. Tony began to wonder how far Travis's jealousy and control had gone when it came to Audra. She decided she needed to make a point of talking to Jody. Being pulled through the front door, Tony said, "I think I'd better let your mom know I'm here, Dougie, don't you think?" "Nah, she's with Lexi doing girl stuff or something. Come on." Audra walked through the front door behind her brother and Tony. Ignoring her excited brother's squeals, she immediately turned right to go down the hall and escape to her room. Noticing Audra was trying to get to her room, Tony tried to stop her so the mark on her forehead would be obvious when her parents saw her. Quickly, Tony asked, "Audra, don't you want to come and see Dougie's present with us?" Sorry. Without turning fully around, Audra said in profile, "No, that's okay. I've seen it." She continued to half run, half walk to her room. Watching Audra retreat, bothered she wasn't going to be able to talk to her, Tony turned to Dougie. "Well, I guess it's just you and me, little man. Take me to your present." Letting go of her hand, convinced she would finally follow him, Dougie J ran through the kitchen and out the back door. Bouncing up and down, he yelled, Look, I'm getting a swing set." Tony stepped through the screen door before it could slam. In the middle of a rather sizable backyard, 2 men in matching blue work shirts were busy assembling a rather impressive playset. "My goodness, look at that. Aren't you a lucky little boy?" she stated with what she thought would be an impressive enough excitement to make Dougie J happy. Even though it looked like the 2 workmen had a long way to go before finishing the set, Tony could tell it was going to be big. "Yeah, and I don't get to play on it till tomorrow because it's my birthday." "Well, that's good because I don't think it will be finished before tomorrow." Look, Dougie chimed as he ran over to a toolbox sitting on the ground and grabbed the brochure of his birthday present, handing it to Tony. "Oh, yes, let me see," Tony said as she took the brochure. Scanning the paperwork, she could see what the set was going to look like. The main body was a sturdy red wood square that resembled a small fort with an upper deck that stood 7 feet off the ground and was protected by a peaked roof. On one side, jutting from the top deck, was a long support bar where 2 yellow swings hung and gently swayed from the vibration of the workers' drills. Directly opposite the swings, on the other side of the fort, was a matching yellow slide. The side of the set farthest from the house was a cargo chain ladder leading up to the top deck from the ground. Inside the little square platform was a red plastic steering wheel mounted to one side, resembling a boat's helm. On the other side, facing the kitchen window, was a faux rock wall with rock-style multicolored hand grips. Underneath the upper deck hung a green tire swing supported by heavy chains. Tony sat down on the back porch step of the house to study the brochure. Dougie came and sat by her and chatted excitedly near her shoulder, explaining the intricacies of his present and pointing to the pictures in the brochure. And this here is a ladder made of rope, and this is going to have a wheel like a real boat that can be my hideout. I'm going to play Peter Pan and make people climb the sides of my ship to get up to see me and everything. That sounds very exciting. When is your party? It's tomorrow, and Mommy says we're having ice cream, cake, and everything. Tony was happy to sit and listen to her youngest neighbor. He was in the middle of telling her about the new plastic sword he wanted so he could play his favorite storybook character when a loud scream came from inside the house. "Oh, Mother, what have you done? It'll never be ready in time now." Tony could tell by the tone of voice that Jody's middle daughter was having a fit about something. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed, followed by heavy footsteps and a second door. The yelling match continued. "I haven't done anything to it," Lexi, Jody yelled back, her statement more pleading than angry. "And why didn't you tell me before the day of the prom that this dress was too big? I could have sworn it fit you when you bought it. Now get out here so we can fix it, or it for sure won't be done in time." "No, you'll ruin it, and it did fit until you decided to fix it," Lexi snidely remarked as she made air quotes with her fingers. "Lexi, all I did was take in the sides. It isn't ruined, and it will be if I have to rush to fix the rest of it." "What is this all about?" Tony asked Dougie J. "My stupid sisters are going to a prom tonight," Dougie explained in a pout. "You mean prom?" "Yeah, and they're being all stupid about it." "Oh." Tony wasn't sure what to say to her little friend to make him feel better. She opted for, "Well, girls can sometimes be silly about stuff like that." "I guess, but they've been yelling all day." Tony could tell Dougie was upset by the way he kept his eyes on the ground. He reached into the pocket of his jeans and brought out a little doll. "What do you have there, Dougie?" Tony wanted to get his attention off the chaos going on inside the house. "It's Peter Pan. My Grandpa George got it for me at Disneyland." "Well, it's very nice. Did he and your grandma go to Disneyland just to get this for you?" With a little less enthusiasm than he'd shown earlier, Dougie responded, "Yeah, and see, I also have Tinkerbell." He pulled out a little Tinkerbell doll from his other pocket. He put the two dolls in his lap and stared down at them with a soft sadness on his face. Tony felt sorry for him, so she simply let him hold his dolls without saying anything. They sat together in silence as she rubbed his back. After watching Dougie for a few moments, as the two of them listened to the fighting behind them, she thought it would help if she could get him to talk. "It's hard to hear your sisters and Mommy yelling sometimes, isn't it?" "Uh-huh." He sat in silence, then said, "It makes Mommy sad." His remark took Tony by surprise. So that was it. He was worried about his mom. For a 6-year-old little boy, she thought it was awfully sensitive of him. It puzzled her. Kids who were overly sensitive to in-family fighting usually were bothered by the overall yelling, but Dougie seemed more concerned for his mother's feelings. From directly behind them, Dayla came stomping through the kitchen as she fumed at the top of her lungs. Tony could hear her through the open door. "Mom, you didn't answer me! Why can't I go?" "Dayla, please, not now," Jody implored as she carried a light pink formal dress into the kitchen draped across her arms like a baby and headed for the laundry room as Dayla dogged her heels. "I have to deal with your sisters right now. Have you seen Audra come in the house yet?" "How would I know if she's in the house or not?" Dayla replied in a snotty tone. "She's probably still outside sucking face with Travis." Tony thought Dayla's tone bordered on disrespect as she sat uncomfortably on the step listening. "Well, I think I heard her come in. Go see if she's in her room, please. I have to make sure she gets to the hairdresser on time, and then I have to finish Lexi's dress." "Then can I go to Amanda's?" "No, Dayla, I already told you can't go over to her house this weekend. Your dad and I think you've been over there enough for 1 month." "You always think of everybody but me," Dayla whined. "You don't care about anything I want." "Dayla, I said enough," Jody pleaded, exasperated. "Daddy would let me go." "No, he wouldn't. You've been at Amanda's every weekend, and it's time you stayed home. Now, why don't you go find Audra while I finish fixing Lexi's dress?" Jody begged tiredly. It was only 11:30 in the morning, but when Tony snuck a peek inside the house, She could see the tired blue circles of exhaustion that surrounded Jody's eyes. I want to take the dress to a tailor or something, Lexi continued the disagreement with her mother. Lexi, stop. I can fix it. You just have to give me time. But you don't know how to sew good enough. Allison said her mom could fix it for me. Let me take it to her. Dayla interrupted Jody's answer to Lexi. Audra won't open her door, Mom, and I'm going to Amanda's whether you like it or not. Dayla, shut up. Mom is working on my dress, Lexi screamed. You shut up. I don't care about your stupid dress. Besides, you just said she can't fix it. Tony couldn't take any more. She felt guilty sitting on the stoop listening to her friend arguing with her daughters, and stood up to leave. Maybe I'd better go, Tony said to Dougie. As she reached for the door, prepared for the consequences of letting the three women know she was there and that she had heard everything, she looked through the dark shadows of the screen door and saw a transformation come over Jody. Standing as if frozen, Jody's habitual nervous blinking began to increase rapidly as she slowly turned her head from side to side between her yelling daughters, like she were watching a tennis match, as the two girls totally ignored their mother. Tony watched as a blank expression came over Jody's face as she looked down at the dress in her arms. Acting like she'd never seen it before, she gave the material a little bounce as if trying to gauge the weight of it. Continuing to stare at the downy object, she let the bottom of the formal slide from her cradled arms and land on the floor in a crumple of pink taffeta. She blinked more as her eyes glazed over. Holding up the bodice to face level, she stared at it as if she couldn't quite make out what it was. Blinking, blinking. She started rubbing the material between her fingers as if the texture and substance were foreign to her. Unsure of what she was seeing, whether Jody was going to faint or if it was a break from reality that none she'd ever seen, Tony opened the door and made a quick move toward Jody. At the same time as Tony pulled the screen door open, Lexi yelled in outrage, Mom, you're dragging my dress on the floor. Snapping out of the trance she was in, Jody looked up like she'd been slapped and saw Lexi, Dayla, and Tony staring at her. The vacant look in her eyes had Lexi responding in an exasperated tone. Mom, what's wrong with you? As Jody stayed silent, Tony could tell she was trying desperately to recognize her surroundings by willing herself to concentrate. The emotions that ran across her face were so fast and fleeting, they reminded Tony of images being flipped on consecutive sheets of paper showing a moving caricature of perplexed lunacy. Jody blinked, blinked, blinked as if trying to bring the world into focus as her eyebrows stayed in a fixed, marked position. Oh, great, Dayla said sarcastically. She's blinking again. Somewhere in the recesses of her mind, Jody knew the girls were talking to her, but they were so far away. She also knew the feeling of a panic attack and fear started creeping up her spine. She knew she couldn't let her children see her have an attack like she'd had coming back from her parents. They would know she was weak. She tried harder and harder to focus. As soon as Tony reached out and took hold of her upper arm, Jody came back to the room, like Tony had pinched her instead of giving her arm a comforting squeeze. With a suddenness that shocked everyone, she said firmly, Alexis Jane, stop. I will get it finished in time, I promise. Dayla, for the last time, I said no. Tony had never seen anyone change so quickly. It startled and confused her in equal measure. She let go of Jody's arm and stepped back. Lexi stepped toward her mother, reaching for the dress. Mother, what happened to you? Your eyes were all glassy. Nothing, Jody lied. I'm just getting a headache. Her famed bravado was a facade, and Tony knew it. Seriously, Mom, that was totally spooky. Lexi was gathering her dress off the floor, more concerned for the dress and her mother's strange behavior. Jody blinked some more with a quickness that made her look like an old-fashioned flirt. Standing with arms crossed in front of her, Dayla said in disgust, Oh, God, Mom, stop blinking. You have no idea how dumb it makes you look. Dayla, for all that's holy, will you shut up? Lexi screamed at her sister. Tony watched as the fighting continued, concentrating on Jody and seeing her react like she had never lost track of the moments. I don't have to, and I'm going to Amanda's. I'm not falling for whatever mind game Mom is playing, Dayla replied apathetically. I don't think she's playing, Lexi said. Whatever. Dayla Louise, go to your room, Jody ordered, turning her head to look at Tony with a mix of humiliation and embarrassment. Tony tried to cover the awkwardness by smiling compassionately. Before she could form a reply, she was halted mid-step by Dayla's final words as she stomped from the room. "Oh, you're the meanest mom ever. I hate you." A bedroom door slammed a few seconds later. Dayla's words reverberated around the room like a sledgehammer against a bell. Tony heard Jody gasp and watched the apparent shock and hurt cross her face like a dark shroud. Jody stood still and stared at Tony as if silently apologizing. When she spoke, it was in a whisper. "She's never said that to me before, even when she was smaller and threw temper tantrums." Tony knew kids always said they hated their parents, but they never meant it. But the force behind Dayla's words had been powerful, and she could feel Jody's devastation because her eyes were brimming with unshed tears. Tony had the feeling that Jody had actually believed the 13-year-old. "She didn't mean it, honey." "Oh, please, Mother, Dayla is such a brat. Don't be so sensitive. You know she didn't mean it." Lexi was trying with little success to free the upper part of her dress Jody still had a death grip on. Tony stepped over to Jody and hugged her around the shoulders. Lexi was pleading, "Mom, please let go of the dress." The front door banged open as Doug came in with Archer in tow. Walking with purposeful strides across the living room into the kitchen, he took in the scene with blistering eyes. "What the heck is going on in here? We can hear the yelling from the front yard." Everyone turned toward the loud booming voice as the two men stood in the archway to the kitchen. Jody jumped back from Tony's touch as if stung. With a quickness that surprised Tony, Lexi ran to Doug. "Daddy, promise tonight, my dress doesn't fit." She had turned into a whiny, "Daddy, I need your spoiled child," right before Tony's eyes. "Lexi," he opened his arms and folded her into a hug, ever the doting father. "Don't worry, honey. I'm sure we can do something about it." While Doug was catering to Lexi, Tony whispered to Jody, "Jody, are you all right?" Jody simply stood rooted to the spot looking at Tony, blinking heavily like she was trying to clear smoke from her eyes. Archer, going around Doug and Lexi, walked shyly into the kitchen. "Hello, Jody. It's nice to see you." He stood looking at her with his hands in the back pockets of his jeans. Tony stayed focused on Jody, not seeing the look on Archer's face as he continued to stare at Jody. Wringing her hands tightly, Jody gave a shy glimpse up at Archer. "Hi, Archer." Stumbling a little, Jody confessed, "I'm so embarrassed you had to hear any of this." Tony gave a quick glance at Archer while also trying to take in the dynamics of Doug and Lexi. Releasing Lexi, Doug walked in a few feet further into the kitchen to stand next to Archer. "Now, Jody, what the heck is going on here?" He addressed her with his hands on his hips and the tone one of a school principal in disciplinary mode. Before Jody could explain, Dayla came out of her room at a run, adding to the cacophony in the kitchen. "Daddy, you're home." She ran up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I thought I heard you come in." As if nothing out of the norm had happened, Tony watched Jody go from the confused hurt mother to the responsible wife in a matter of seconds. Taking a step back against the counter, she could do nothing but watch. Jody's transformation had her furrowing her forehead until two deep lines formed between her eyebrows. "Oh, it's just been one of those mornings," Jody explained calmly. "Prom is tonight, and Lexi and Audra need to get to the hair salon. I'm working on Lexi's dress. The workmen are outside putting Dougie's birthday present together. You know, the usual chaos." Her nonchalant words did not match the shadow behind her eyes. "Daddy, Mom won't let me go to Amanda's." Dayla buried her face into her father's back as she continued to squeeze him around the middle. Trying to extract himself from Dayla's hold, Doug gave Tony a cursory greeting as if he'd just noticed her. "Oh, hi, Tony." "Hello, Doug." She'd always liked Doug, but there was something about him she couldn't quite put her finger on. Not unlike a puzzle where a couple of major pieces were missing and you couldn't see the full picture without them. Looking down over his shoulder at Dayla as he tugged at her arms, Doug asked, "Now what's this? Mom won't let you go to Amanda's?" Whining like a 2-year-old, Dayla poured out her sad story. "No, I told her she'd been spending too much time at Amanda's like we talked about," Jody said. Watching Archer from the corner of his eye, Doug said, "I never said any such thing. Really, Jody, I don't know where you get these things. Of course you can go to Amanda's, Dayla. I don't know where your mother gets these ideas." A look of betrayal crossed Jody's face, and Tony watched her slip inside herself again. Tony stood in place, observing, and began to believe she could actually see Jody crumple by the way she curled ever so slightly toward her center, like a stone had been added to her already compressed chest. Realizing she had been being watched, Jody gave Tony a dismissive glance and turned toward the countertop in the pretense of staying busy. It was then that Dayla added to Jody's mental wound. I knew you wouldn't be as mean as Mom, Daddy. Thank you. I'm going to call her now. She ran out of the kitchen to the phone in the living room. Jody, you've really got to stop being so strict with the girls. Turning to Archer, he added with a shake of his head, Women, right, Archer? It wasn't really a question. I swear I have to keep an eye on her every minute. Archer simply looked at Doug without responding. Tony watched the exchange between man and wife, and her confusion deepened. It was a side of Doug she'd never seen before, his purposeful attempt to undermine Jody. Maybe she was just tired and was reading something into the situation that wasn't there, because Jody continued to act as if everything was normal. Giving Archer a slight pat on the shoulder, Doug said, Come on out back, Archer, and let me show you what we bought Dougie J for his birthday tomorrow. On his way out the door, Doug turned. Oh, by the way, Jody, Archer will be staying for dinner. That is, if it's okay with you, Jody, Archer politely inquired. Oh, of course, that's fine, Jody replied without turning around, never taking her eyes off the cabinet while she rummaged around as if looking for something she couldn't find. Of course it's not a problem. She's happy to have you, Doug responded quickly, blocking Jody's right to the respect she was entitled to as his wife. Now come on out back and take a look. The two men disappeared out the door into the backyard as Archer gave Jody one last quick glance. Jody, I can see you're really busy, and I'm going to go. Tony wasn't sure if leaving was the right thing to do. Jody gave a polite bye to her friend with a polite nod of the head. Tony saw the little smile Jody gave her, but the haunted look behind her eyes contradicted it. Tony walked through the living room, heading for the back door, and caught one last trailing remark from Lexi to her mother as she stepped aside to let Lexi leave ahead of her. Mom, I'm taking my dress to Allison's. I'd rather have her mom work on it. Lexi turned sharply and walked out the front door ahead of Tony. She carried her pink formal like it was a fragile child. At the same time, Dayla's conversation with Amanda over the phone was a snippet of mangled words that Tony caught out of the corner of her ear. She was sure Jody could hear them as well, as since it was apparent Dayla was purposefully talking louder than need be. Yeah, I'll be over soon. My brother's birthday. Oh, they always give him whatever he wants because he's the baby. I don't care about any stupid playset. My birthday? A necklace, whatever. I don't care. He's Mom's favorite. I wish I had your mom. Nah, who cares? Okay, see you soon. Dayla hung up and ran around Tony behind her sister. Just as Tony moved to follow the two girls out of the house, she heard Dougie J from the kitchen. It's okay, Mommy. I love you. Touched by this little boy's sensitivity, Tony leaned slightly to the left and looked at the scene in the other room. She watched as Dougie J put his tiny arms around his mother's hips. He looked up and saw his mom looking down at him. He then reached behind him and pulled something out of his back pocket and handed it up to Jody. It was one of the little dolls he had showed Tony earlier. Here, you can hold Tinkerbell if you want. She'll make you feel better. Tony heard Jody say, Oh, thank you, honey. I think that would really help. Taking the small doll, Jody studied the little fairy with her green dress and yellow hair like she'd never seen it before. Ashamed at herself for spying, Tony turned to quietly exit the house. Turning back one last time to make sure she hadn't been seen, she saw Dougie J run out the back door as she saw Jody squeeze a Tinkerbell doll and hold it to her heart like it was the greatest gift she'd ever received. Puzzled, Tony left the house sadly and softly closed the door behind her. Am I just really tired, she wondered, as if something terribly out of proportion in the Warren household hit her. It was a question that would haunt her over the weeks to come. Give me a second. I need to take a sip of water.